All right, Marine. Today we're going to break down something you're going to be hearing a lot about. MCDP 1 to 4.
Yep.
That's the Marine Corps doctrinal publication on competition. Think of it as like your guide
Okay.
to how the Marine Corps sees the world today, even when things aren't a straight-up fight.
Yeah.
We've been diving deep into this document,
Yeah.
and we're going to try to highlight some of the need-to-know stuff.
It's a real shift in thinking for sure. It's
Yeah.
like moving beyond just preparing for war to constantly competing for advantage.
Exactly.
Um,
Imagine it like this. The world's a chessboard. Nations are the players.
right.
And every move, even something like, humanitarian aid or something, has an impact.
Yeah.
MCDP 1 to 4 wants Marines to be thinking about that whole board, not just the battlefield.
Yeah. And that's really where this idea comes in, that competition is constant. MCDP 1 to 4 hammers this home.
Yeah.
It's happening in diplomacy, economics, information. Every action, even seemingly small ones, can like ripple out and affect national goals.
So no matter where a Marine is,
Right.
they're always part of this. Even back home on leave, they're still on the chessboard.
Absolutely. And that leads to one of the big takeaways.
Yeah.
The competition continuum. MCDP 1 to 4 lays out this spectrum from peace to war.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. Most real-world situations are somewhere in between.
Okay, so it's not black and white, it's shades of gray. That sounds tricky to navigate.
It is, and that's why this document is so important. MCDP 1 to 4 wants Marines to be comfortable operating across that entire spectrum.
The whole thing.
Yeah, the old we're at war or we're at peace mindset just doesn't cut it anymore.
To illustrate this, they use a couple of different models, right?
Yeah, there's the linear model, which is like a ruler with threshold of violence marked on it.
Okay.
Anything below that line is like diplomacy and economic maneuvering, while above it is actual conflict.
Gotcha.
But then there's the circular model, which gets at how conflict feeds back into the competition.
So even if Marines aren't in direct combat, their actions can still influence whether things escalate or de-escalate.
Exactly.
It all ties back to that chessboard idea.
It does, and the document then dives into 3 big attributes of this competition environment: ambiguity, uncertainty, and constant change.
Sounds like a recipe for a headache.
Well, it's the reality of the world we're in. Think about it like battlefield intelligence.
Yep.
You're constantly trying to figure out the enemy's intentions, but there's always going to be some fog of war.
Right.
MCDP 1 to 4 wants Marines to have that same mindset in all their actions, not just when bullets are flying.
To make this more concrete, they use some historical examples, right?
Definitely. For instance, they bring up the Marshall Plan after World War II.
Okay.
On the surface, it was all about rebuilding Europe. But it was also a huge play in the competition against the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
A perfect example of how economic actions can have massive ripple effects.
And then there's the example of Russia's moves in Georgia and Ukraine, where they used ambiguity and uncertainty to achieve their goals without triggering like a major international response.
Exactly. It shows how a competitor can operate in that gray zone, using a mix of military posturing, disinformation, and political maneuvering. It's a reminder that the battlefield isn't always clearly defined.
Okay, so we've got this constant complex competition going on. What else does MCDP 1 to 4 highlight about the nature of this environment?
Well, it talks about the rapid evolution of everything, both in terms of technology and the actual ideas about how to use it. It's like a constant arms race, not just for weapons, but for strategy and thinking itself.
Can you give us an example?
Think about the development of anti-accessoria denial strategies, A2AD for short.
Okay.
These emerged as a direct response to U.S. power projection capabilities.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how one side's move forces the other to adapt and innovate. It's co-evolution in action.
So it's this constant back and forth with each side trying to stay ahead of the curve? It's not enough to just master the current way of doing things.
Yeah.
You have to be anticipating what's next.
Right. Absolutely. And that brings us to a crucial aspect that MCDP 1 to 4 really emphasizes.
Let me guess.
People.
You got it.
The document drives home that the human element is essential to understanding competition.
Okay.
Cultures, psychologies, even individual personalities, these all factor in.
So it's not just about tanks and missiles.
Yeah.
It's about the people behind them.
Yeah.
And the people being affected by them.
Exactly. You can have the best tech in the world, but if you don't understand the cultural context you're operating in or how your actions are perceived, you can easily make things worse.
It's almost like you need to be part anthropologist,
Right.
part psychologist, in addition to being a Marine.
Right. That's a great way to put it. Even the threat of violence can have huge psychological impacts.
Yeah.
It triggers stress responses,
Hmm.
can lead to irrational behavior, and all of that feeds into the competition.
It's like how even if someone just threatens to punch you,
Right.
your body still reacts, right?
Yeah.
Adrenaline, heart rate, all that changes even if the punch never lands.
Precisely. And on the world stage, those reactions can have big consequences. MCDP 1 to 4 wants Marines to understand that dynamic, both in themselves and in their competitors.
So being aware of these human factors on both sides can give a Marine a real edge.
Definitely. It can help you de-escalate situations, build trust, even predict how your opponent might react. It's not just about winning through force, it's about understanding the human landscape.
We've covered a lot about the nature of competition,
Mm-hmm.
but how does MCDP 1 to 4 actually say Marines should approach it?
That's where it gets into the art and science of competition. There's this great line in the document. The Marine Corps, as part of the Joint Force, plays an essential role in securing national aims in conditions sometimes regarded as outside of the military sphere.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean for a Marine on the ground?
It means Marines need to be ready to compete in ways that go beyond traditional warfare. And to do that, they need both creativity, the art of competition, and a structured analytical approach, the science of it.
So you've got to be a tough warrior,
Yeah.
but also a thinker, a strategist, almost a diplomat sometimes.
Exactly. MCDP 1 to 4 wants Marines to be adaptable, to be able to think critically and analyze situations, but also to come up with innovative solutions. It's about recognizing that the 21st century battlefield is far more complex than just a firefight.
All right, Marine, we've thrown a lot of information at you, but we want to make sure this really sinks in. In part 2 of our deep dive, we're going to get into the specifics of how war fits into all of this. Stay with us.
All right, Maureen, let's pick up where we left off. We've been talking about how NCDP 1 to 4 emphasizes this broader view of competition, operating across that whole spectrum from peace to war. But that doesn't mean the Corps is forgetting about war itself.
Right, because as much as we'd all like to avoid it, war is still a very real possibility.
Absolutely. And MCDP 1 to 4 acknowledges that. It's very clear. War is a part of this continuum, the most intense and violent part.
Okay, so how does MCDP 1 to 4 talk about war in this context, given all this emphasis on competition?
It ties it directly to the Marine Corps warfighting philosophy, describing war as a clash of wills.
Okay.
It emphasizes that even though technology and tactics change, war is fundamentally about one group trying to impose its will on another.
And it can take so many forms, right? From small-scale conflicts all the way up to global wars.
Exactly. But the key takeaway here is that war, despite its destructive nature, is still a form of competition. It's the most extreme form, where the stakes are highest. But it's still about trying to achieve objectives.
So on this competition continuum we've been talking about, war is where things boil over.
Yeah.
It's what happens when all those other forms of competition, diplomacy, economic pressure, information warfare, fail to resolve the clash.
That's a great way to put it, and that's where that circular model MCDP 1 to 4 uses becomes really helpful.
Okay.
It shows how conflict, what happens above that threshold of violence, feeds back into the competition that comes after.
So war has this lasting impact, shaping the nature of the competition even after the fighting stops.
Precisely. Think about it like a major turning point in a judo match.
Okay.
One big move can shift the whole balance of power, even after the match is over. That shift continues to affect how the competitors relate to each other.
MCDP 1 to 4 uses the example of World War II and how it reshaped the relationship between the U.S. and Japan, right?
Exactly. Japan's defeat allowed the U.S. to reshape their political landscape. But it also led to cooperation, with the U.S. providing aid and security guarantees.
So war, in that case, created the conditions for both competition and cooperation. It's complex.
Very much so. And that's why MCDP 1 to 4 encourages Marines to think about these long-term implications. It's not just about winning the immediate battle, but understanding how those victories shape the strategic landscape for years, even decades to come.
Okay, so war is part of this continuum. It has a major impact. But MCDP 1 to 4 also says that even day-to-day competition shares some key attributes with war, right?
Yes, and it comes back to those three we've already touched on: ambiguity, uncertainty, and constant change. Those are present whether you're on a battlefield or in a diplomatic meeting.
The document keeps hammering these points home. Why are they so crucial to understand?
Because they represent the inherent challenge of any competitive environment. Ambiguity makes it hard to read your opponent's intentions, uncertainty makes it tough to predict their actions, and constant change demands that you be adaptable and ready to adjust your approach on the fly.
So how does a Marine navigate this kind of world where the rules are always in flux and the enemy or competitor is often hard to pin down?
MCDP 1 to 4 talks about the need for a combined approach, blending what it calls the art and the science of competition.
Okay.
It's about having the creativity to adapt to unexpected situations
Wow.
and the analytical skills to assess those situations accurately.
So you have to think like a chess player, planning your strategy,
Mm-hmm.
but also be able to think on your feet and improvise when things go sideways.
Exactly. It's about being deliberate, but adaptable,
Mhm.
strategic, yet flexible. And it's about accepting a certain level of risk, because in this kind of world, you can never eliminate risk entirely.
MCDP 1 to 4 also seems to put a lot of weight on the human element of all this, not just the strategic side.
Absolutely. The document acknowledges that understanding culture, psychology, even individual personalities can be as important as understanding weapon systems
Hmm.
or economic indicators.
Can you give an example of how these human factors can come into play, say, for a Marine deployed overseas?
Sure. Imagine you're in a region with a lot of tension between different ethnic or religious groups.
Sure.
You need to be aware of the history, the cultural sensitivities, the things that could potentially escalate the situation.
Because even a small misunderstanding, if it taps into those underlying tensions, could have huge consequences. It's like unknowingly stepping on a landmine.
That's a powerful analogy, and that's why MCDP 1 to 4 is so big on cultural awareness, building relationships, effective communication. Those are just as vital as marksmanship or combat tactics.
So it's about broadening the Marine's skill set, thinking beyond just the warrior role.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that in the 21st century, the battlefield is as much about winning hearts and minds as it is about winning firefights.
All right, Marine, we've covered a lot of ground here, from how MCDP 1 to 4 views war to these key attributes of the competition environment. But we're not done yet. In Part 3, we'll look at how the document sees the future of competition and what that means for Marines. Don't go anywhere. All right, Marine, we're back for the final stretch of our deep dive into MCDP 1 to 4.
Okay.
We talked about how the Corps sees competition, how war fits in, all of that. But now it's time to look ahead. What does MCDP 1 to 4 say about where all of this is going?
Well, it starts by acknowledging that the future is going to be even more complex
great.
and unpredictable than what we're dealing with right now.
Which honestly is a bit unsettling to hear,
Yeah.
given everything we've already discussed.
It is. It's the reality we're facing. But MCDP 1 to 4 doesn't just leave it at that. It highlights how competition is constantly evolving, driven by things like new technologies, shifting alliances, and new players entering the game.
So it's not enough to just master the current playbook. You've got to be trying to predict what the next playbook will look like.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of coevolution comes in.
Okay.
MCDP 1 to 4 talks about how competition is a dynamic process where one side's actions often trigger a response from the other, leading to a constant back and forth.
Kind of like an arms race, but not just for weapons.
Exactly. It happens in every domain.
Yeah.
Economics, information, diplomacy. One side makes a move, the other adapts and counters, and the cycle continues.
Can you give an example of how this might play out in a non-military situation?
Sure. Think about the rise of China's economic power
Go
as
for it.
they've become more assertive in global markets.
Right.
The U.S. and other countries have had to adjust their strategies.
Yeah.
Tariffs, diversifying supply chains, investing in new technologies. It's all part of trying to maintain a competitive edge in a rapidly changing landscape.
So it's like a constant game of chess, where every move creates new opportunities and challenges for both sides.
That's a great way to think about it. And MCDP 1 to 4 wants Marines to be thinking in those terms, to be able to anticipate those shifts and how the playing field might change in the years to come.
But how do you even begin to anticipate the future when there are so many unknowns, so many variables at play?
It's not easy. But the document offers some guidance.
Okay.
First, it stresses the importance of constantly assessing the environment, gathering information, and analyzing trends. You have to be watching the game closely to understand how it's changing.
Sounds like a lot of homework.
It's essential homework. And alongside that, MCDP 1 to 4 emphasizes the need to really understand your competitors, their motivations, strengths, weaknesses. It's not enough to just see what they're doing. You've got to understand why.
It's like in poker.
Right.
You don't just want to know your opponent's cards. You want to know their tells, their betting patterns, how they think.
Exactly. MCDP 1 to 4 wants Marines to develop that same kind of strategic thinking, to be able to see the world from their competitors' perspective.
So we've talked about assessing the environment, understanding our competitors, anticipating trends. But what about practical steps? What can a Marine do today to prepare for the challenges of tomorrow.
Well, MCDP 1 to 4 stresses the importance of continuous learning.
Right.
The world's changing rapidly, and Marines need to be constantly updating their knowledge and skills.
So it's not enough to just go through boot camp and MOS school and call it a day. You've got to be learning throughout your entire career.
Absolutely. Whether it's reading, researching, taking courses, or just talking to people with different experiences, Marines need to be actively seeking out new information and perspectives.
What else does MCDP 1 to 4 recommend?
It highlights the importance of building strong partnerships, not just within the military, but across the government. Competition isn't just a military endeavor. It requires a whole-of-government approach.
So Marines need to be able to work effectively with diplomats,
Yeah.
intelligence analysts, economists, all those different agencies.
Exactly. It's about leveraging every tool at the U.S. government's disposal to achieve national objective. No one agency can do it alone.
So MCDP 1.4 is painting a pretty demanding picture of what it means to be a Marine in the 21st century.
It is. It's a call to be more than just a warrior. It's about being a thinker, strategist, diplomat, a constant learner, and a team player.
It sounds like MCDP 1.4 is trying to prepare Marines for a future where the lines are blurred, the challenges are complex, and stakes are high.
That's a good way to sum it up. Competition is a reality of the world we live in, and MCDP 1 to 4 is a call to action for every Marine to rise to that challenge.
Marine, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into MCDP 1 to 4. We've talked about competition, war, the future, and how all of these things are intertwined. Hopefully this has given you a better understanding of how the Corps sees the world and what it expects from its Marines in this complex environment. This document challenges you to think differently, to be adaptable, and to be constantly learning and evolving. Thank you for your service, and good luck out there.